Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking a massive chronological journey through almost 2 decades of Apple's software evolution. We're going to explore the fascinating timeline of iOS. We'll track it from its super early days as a highly classified secret project all the way to the futuristic AI-driven interface of iOS 26. We are literally tracing exactly how our interactions with the digital world have completely transformed. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture it. It's late 2006. It's been almost a year since Steve Jobs tasked 200 top engineers with creating a phone. Internally, this was called Project Purple 2. And the prototype demo? Wow, it was a complete disaster. It flat out didn't work. The phone constantly dropped calls, the battery stopped charging way too early, and apps just routinely corrupted. In a rare moment of terrifying calm, Jobs just looked at the room and delivered a stark reality check. He said, "We don't have a product yet." It is just wild to think that the entire foundation of modern mobile computing started with such a high-stakes, disastrous prototype.
To make sense of this nearly 20-year history, we're going to break it down into 4 distinct eras: the birth of iPhone OS, the flat design revolution, the era of customization, and finally, the liquid glass future.
Era number 1, the birth of iPhone OS, Project Purple 2, and the first multi-touch interface. When the very first iPhone launched in June 2007, it didn't even have an app store. But it had something revolutionary, which was a touch-based interface without a physical keyboard. To actually get there, Apple operated with paranoid secrecy. The hardware team was given fake software, and the software team literally had to test their code on clumsy wooden boxes just to ensure no one saw the whole picture before launch. Crazy, right?
Now, you might be wondering, how do you teach millions of people to use a glass touchscreen when they're so incredibly used to physical buttons? Well, the answer was skeuomorphism. This was the defining design philosophy of early Apple software. Basically, by making digital elements mimic real-world physical objects, Apple gave users immediate visual cues on how to interact with this completely brand new technology.
If you used an iPhone before 2013, this is definitely going to trigger some serious nostalgia. Think back to the Notes app. It looked exactly like a physical yellow legal pad. Game Center was literally styled after a green felt poker table. The whole interface was just heavy with real-world textures. We're talking wood, leather, paper, and glass. It felt incredibly tangible, and honestly, it worked brilliantly to transition the whole world into the smartphone era.
Over the next few years, those early limitations were rapidly solved. In 2007, iOS 1 gave us multi-touch. Just a year later, iOS 2 brought the App Store, which transformed the phone from a closed system into this limitless platform. Jumping to 2011, iOS 5 brought the cloud and voice control with iCloud and Siri, and then in 2012, iOS 6 replaced Google Maps with Apple Maps. But by this point, those heavy physical textures, they were really starting to feel a bit dated.
Which brings us to Era 2, the flat design revolution, tearing down textures for a modern aesthetic. By 2013, the world totally knew how to use a touchscreen. We just didn't need virtual leather and felt anymore. Apple recognized this, and they initiated the most dramatic visual pivot in the company's entire history, completely signaling a huge shift in how we interacted with our devices.
Now, what's really interesting is the stark, jarring contrast between these two philosophies. In 2013, iOS 7 took an absolute sledgehammer to the past. Out went the heavy, skeuomorphic physical textures, and in came a completely flat, vibrant, translucent, and minimalistic aesthetic. It felt so fresh, so clean, and honestly, incredibly futuristic at the time.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just about looking pretty. This cleaner, flat design actually allowed Apple to pack in incredibly complex, feature-dense updates without visually cluttering up the screen. Because the interface was so minimalist, they could seamlessly introduce game changers like the Control Center for quick toggles, AirDrop for easy file sharing, Touch ID biometric security, and, a year later in iOS 8, Apple Pay. The flat era literally turned the iPhone from a cool gadget into an indispensable daily wallet and identity hub.
Moving on to Era 3, the era of customization, making the iPhone truly yours. For over a decade, Apple strictly dictated exactly how your screen looked, mostly just a rigid grid of icons. But as the software matured, Apple introduced another massive philosophical shift. They finally handed the keys over to the user. This rapid evolution kicked off in 2019 when iOS 13 brought dark mode, completely changing the system-wide aesthetic at the tap of a button. Then in 2020, iOS 14 finally broke that grid by letting us drop widgets directly onto our home screens. 2021 gave us focus mode to custom filter our notifications, and 2022's iOS 16 let us totally redesign our lock screens with custom fonts and colors. Over just a few short years, the interface became deeply personal and completely user-controlled.
Which brings us to the absolute peak of the customization era, iOS 18 in 2024. Suddenly, you could completely tint your app icons to perfectly match your wallpaper and leave empty spaces on your home screen wherever you wanted. But more importantly, iOS 18 really set the stage for our next major transformation by introducing the dawn of Apple Intelligence. It perfectly teed up the massive leap forward that was about to come.
And that leads us right into our final era, number 4, the liquid glass future, iOS 26 and the next 20 years of interface. Coinciding with the iPhone 20 redesign that's set to conclude Apple's really ambitious 3-year hardware overhaul in 2027, iOS 26 represents a breathtaking leap straight into futuristic reality.
So what exactly is this new era? Well, liquid glass is basically the biggest UI redesign since iOS 7. It completely replaces those static flat layers we've gotten used to with translucent, dynamic layers that feel like they physically exist inside the device. They actually adapt to your actions and your environment by reflecting and refracting light. It makes the whole interface feel astonishingly smooth and deeply, deeply immersive.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Apple Intelligence literally breathes life into the liquid glass interface. As that translucent interface dynamically shifts, AI is constantly working right under the surface. It's analyzing what's on your screen for instant, contextual chat queries. You can see this happening in real time, like with live call screening providing live translation subtitles right on your dynamically adapting screen. It is a real game changer.
But remember, software doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's this really fascinating synergy with the hardware. Think about it. The early skeuomorphic days relied heavily on glass and steel. Then the flat era utilized steel and titanium. But notice what happens in the future. Because of the massive processing demands of liquid glass and Apple Intelligence, the hardware actually shifted back to recycled aluminum. Why? Because aluminum conducts and disperses heat so much better than titanium, keeping the phone thermally balanced while the AI works over time. It's like a giant puzzle coming perfectly together.
We have seen iOS evolve from physical, skeuomorphic textures into clean, flat designs, and now into this incredibly dynamic liquid glass. As the boundaries between intelligent software and physical hardware completely blur, it leaves us with a massive question. How will AI continue to reshape our physical interactions over the next 20 years? The journey from that disastrous 2006 prototype to the liquid glass future really proves that the interface of tomorrow is always closer than we think. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.